Friends and colleagues, it's been too long, so forgive me for that. I've been off. I was attending the BPRO's CX Summit in Cartagena. BPRO is Colombia's gremio or trade association that supports the outsourcing industry, including everything from IT outsourcing to customer experience and contact centers. It's headed by Ana Karina Kessup, who does a wonderful job promoting that industry. And so they had their annual summit in Cartagena and their award ceremony. From there, I was off to Nairobi, Kenya for the opening of CCI Global's new 5,000 seat contact center. But now I'm back. It's been a lot going on. So first, some good news. Collective Mining, which is developing a gold mine down in the Caldas region down in coffee country near Manizales and Pereira in Colombia, has 5 drill rigs operating at its Guayabalas project, part of its 40,000 meter drill program for this year. They're getting really encouraging results. This is the same team that developed Continental Gold up in Buritica and sold it to Zijin Mining a few years ago for over $1 billion. We published a more detailed update today in Finance Colombia if you want to go over the numbers and the assay results, the chemistry and everything like that. I'll put a link in the notes. And I'm long on Continental because I believe in the team led by Ari Sussman down there. Well, down there and up there, it's a company that the legal headquarters is in Canada. The company has operations in Colombia. And they actually just announced that they have plans. You can already get their stock over the counter in several, in the U.S., they're in Europe, I think in the Frankfurt, one of the German exchanges. And of course in Canada on the TSX, but I believe that they're going to launch on the New York Stock Exchange as well. So moving on, President Gustavo Petro is once again terrifying investors, this time with an announcement that he plans to force private banks to loan money to projects and borrowers of his choosing. He said, and I translate here, "I promise that we're going to present the measures to the Congress of the Republic to reactivate the economy, which will consist, and I say it once and for all, in projects of law that generate forced investment in the private financial system of Colombia, destined to small, medium, and large industry of agriculture and tourism in Colombia to reactivate the country." So this is what Petro's opponents warned about, at least when it comes to intent. They were right. He believes that he has a right to other people's money and can direct the private sector like a dictator. The crazy thing is that everybody knows that Petro is a big left-wing guy, but the system of government where the caudillo or the strongman can tell the private sector what to do is actually fascism. That's what Il Duce, that's what Mussolini did. That's what Perón did down in Argentina back in the day, back in the early 50s. So you've got banks, and then people put their money in the banks, and then normally the bank goes, okay, we're going to loan money if we think that this is going to be a profitable loan and that we're going to get our money back. But in this case, Petro wants to tell the banks what to do with their money. And at the end of the day, the depositor's money to put into whatever kind of project he wants for political or ideological purposes. So he likes that guy, that farmer over there, or that rancher, or that whatever kind of project. And he says, rather than, okay, the government either loaning the money, which is what you would expect a socialist to want to do, not that it's a good idea, but even worse is he's going to go to a private bank and say, you guys have to loan those people that money. Well, what happens if they don't pay back? Okay, are you going to back it with the FNG or something, which is Colombia's Fondo Nacional de Garantías? It's kind of like they kind of like how in the U.S. the Small Business Administration will back a loan that a private bank makes. But anyway, the question now is whether Colombia's institutionalism can withstand these kinds of adventures. Statements and plans like this will destroy investor confidence and scare away capital, just like what's happening right now with Ecopetrol. They're in a governance crisis. Petro appoints his political campaign manager to head a petroleum giant. And then all these board members that are different types of activists and things like that, people that I'm sure are very nice people, but are in no way qualified to sit on the board of directors of a multi-billion dollar multinational company that happens to be about 78% owned by the Colombian government. Speaking of scaring away capital, General Motors is closing its Colmotores factory, which I believe is south of Bogota, after more than 70 years in Colombia. So now, 2 years ago, General Motors said that it was going to expand the factory and invest $50 million to update it to manufacture a new line of vehicles. But I don't know. Of course, they're not going to come out and say that it's because of the administration or anything like that. They already have enough problems. But they did a complete about face from announcing an expansion of their factory in Colombia to announcing a closure of this factory that's been operating for 7 decades. Now, what happens in Colombia is that the country has different import tariffs. And if you import the parts, let's say of a car or a motorcycle, but then build it, do the final assembly here in Colombia, then the tariff is something like 3%. Oh, so the taxes that you pay on the parts that you import. But if you import a whole vehicle, a car or a motorcycle, then I think there might be some exemptions for electric vehicles and things like that. But basically, if you import a whole vehicle, the import duty is 20%. Okay, so that's a lot. So what you end up seeing here is that companies will build cheap mass market cars, kind of low-end cars here in Colombia. So you look at a line, let's take Honda. Okay, so if you go and buy a little Honda 100 or 150 kind of cheap motorcycle that maybe is a couple $1,000s, it's going to be inexpensive. But then if you go to one, and what happens is they assemble them here. But then if you jump to, let's say you want a CBR or a Africa Twin, which is their big adventure bike or something like that, then all of a sudden the price is like $15,000 or $20,000. And you go, why is that? Well, because the bikes that are manufactured in Honda has a big plant in Ohio or maybe back in Japan. And they're going to import the high-end models that are not built in Colombia. They're super expensive, but then the low-end models that are assembled here avoid that 20% penalty. So Ford, for example, you see that it kind of has a reputation as a higher-end brand down here because they're importing the Raptor, the Raptor pickup truck. The F-150 is very popular. Then you'll see some other Ford models and things like that, but you don't see a lot of the real low-end Fords because Ford doesn't really manufacture cars in Colombia, at least to my knowledge. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. But so General Motors, who was going to expand the plant, has now decided to close the plant. We can only think that the changing economic confidence from investors is scaring investors away. I know of another big European plant that was going to open here. They didn't publicize that they quietly closed their plan because they don't want any trouble with the government. But it's having an effect. And when you sit around and you say you're going to tell people what to do with their private assets, where they're going to spend money and things like that, you can't expect that to attract more investment. By the way, the Minister of Labor, I think her name is Inez something, but Colombia's Minister of Labor and the Petro administration has told General Motors that they have to keep the workers employed. They gave them an order saying that they can't fire the workers even though the factory's closing. So we'll see how that works out. Now, to be fair and balanced, former President Alvaro Uribe, who in recent years has seen his once stellar legacy tarnished by a litany of revelations, is now formally charged with witness tampering in a drama that goes back to 2012. So back in 2012, Uribe, who was president for 2 terms and then was in the Senate, and a lot of people in Colombia, but a lot of people, especially in the international community, credited Uribe with kind of making Colombia safe again for travel, for investment, for living. He kind of broke the back of the FARC when Juan Manuel Santos, who went on to become president, was his defense minister. and Pacho Santos, Francisco Santos, who I did a great interview with. He's a great guy. So glad to know him personally. He's a lot of fun. But he was the vice president. He also happens to be Juan Manuel Santos's cousin. But anyway, so Uribe kind of broke the back of the FARC while, now you have to share credit because Santos was the defense minister. But then, so Uribe goes into the Senate, and there's a guy, what's his name? Ivan Cepeda. Ivan Cepeda was another senator, kind of a left-wing guy, and then Uribe is a certainly right-wing guy. So Uribe asked this, only the Supreme Court, the way Colombia is set up, if you're going to investigate a nationally elected official like the president or vice president or a member of Congress, only the Supreme Court can do that. The regular prosecutor cannot, like the attorney general, cannot do that. So Uribe asked the Supreme Court to investigate Ivan Cepeda for trying to trump up allegations against Uribe. So the Supreme Court goes and investigates, and they come and they actually clear Cepeda, saying that they were trying to say that they were trying to like frame Uribe or falsely accuse him of some crimes with paramilitaries. Now, Uribe's brother has already served prison time for the case called the 12 Discípulos, the 12 disciples, which were, he was convicted of crimes of being involved in paramilitaries. But you could say that's his brother, not him. Fine. But anyway, so the Supreme Court clears Cepeda, but then launches charges resulting in the investigation against Uribe, that Uribe actually made the whole thing up to go after Cepeda. And so now Uribe's been ensnared in this mess since 2012. So anyway, the investigation goes along, and then charges were actually issued when back during the administration of Ivan Duque. Now, Ivan Duque was a president. This was about 5 years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago in the last administration. Now, Duque is a Uribe acolyte, protege, disciple, whatever you want to say. And so the Supreme Court launches these charges against Uribe. But Uribe, and he was actually arrested, okay? But anyway, so Uribe then resigns from the Senate. And then by resigning from the Senate, he says, look, I'm no longer an elected national politician, so you, the Supreme Court, have no right to investigate me. So then that would make the charges transfer from the Supreme Court to the Attorney General. Now, the Attorney General was Francisco Barbosa, who was appointed by Ivan Duque. They're actually friends. They're friends from back in school. But anyway, so Francisco Barbosa kind of tried to quash the charges. He went and tried to have the charges dismissed, but the Supreme Court wouldn't let that happen. So basically, the thing just sat there and it didn't go anywhere. Okay, now Barbosa serves his term, which does not coincide perfectly with the presidential term. So actually, Petro had to deal with Francisco Barbosa, and they really don't like each other. But anyway, Barbosa's term runs out. Petro gets to submit a list of possible prosecutor nominees that the Supreme Court ultimately votes on. Now we have a new prosecutor, Luz Adriana Camargo Garzon. She doesn't seem to be a close pal of Petro. She the looks of things, she seems to be relatively independent. She had some kind of minor role in Petro's mayoral administration, but it doesn't even look like they necessarily know each other well. But anyway, now she's the prosecutor, and these charges or this trial has become unstuck. And so what's happened is that these charges, so now he actually has been formally charged, which Barbosa would kind of refuse to do, but he couldn't just dismiss the charges, okay? Because you have to file and kind of say, look, there's nothing here. It's not like you can just decide, I'm going to just erase this and it's going to go away once something exists in the court. So now the trial has actually started, and Uribe has actually been formally charged with witness tampering. So his once really kind of global reputation. And then in Colombia, you look at things like the false positive cases where the military was paid bounty to for the heads of FARC guerrillas, but what the military was doing is they were just shooting poor country folk and dressing them up as combatants to get money. They were killing innocent people to go and collect a bounty. This happened during Uribe's terms. There's a lot of controversies that have come out over time. It's interesting how sometimes some people who, when they had a term, they were looked at kind of, unpopular. They were unpopular, but then in hindsight, people look back at them as a great statesman or things like that. But then often it's the opposite. Sometimes somebody who was looked at as a great, in the U.S., Wilson is a good example of that. President Wilson, who tried to start the League of Nations, and people try to make him look like this great visionary. And, there's a Woodrow Wilson Center of Government and all this nonsense. And if you go and look at the guy, he was a bastard. He was a really just, I'll say, probably one of the worst U.S. presidents. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So let's go back to some good news. The Colombia hosted a U.S. State Department delegation last month for high-level talks, which led to several announcements. The foreign minister, Luis Gilberto Murillo, who used to be the governor of Chocó, fascinating guy, went to college in Moscow for like mining engineering or something like that. His wife is Russian. He was a U.S. citizen. He became a U.S. citizen, which he had to renounce to become Colombia's foreign minister. But anyway, he actually was a presidential candidate, and when it looked like he wasn't going to come close to winning, Petro offered him look, I'm going to win, so join me and you'll have a high position, which is what happened. But anyway, Murillo announced that Colombians can now access almost 20,000 U.S. jobs. These are non-agricultural work visas, not the Braceros program, which is for agricultural workers. But let's say H-2, I think they're called H-2B visas. I'm not an expert, but let's say there's a H-1B visa, which is for high-level professionals like programmers and engineers or something like that. But let's say an employer needs like regular workers, like in a warehouse or something like that. Then maybe you can come on an H-2 on a non-agricultural work visa, and more than 1,000 summer job visas are available. So what happens is like amusement parks, like my favorites, which are Cedar Point and Kings Island. But you also have Busch Gardens, and you have places like Vail Resorts, and you have Universal and these kinds of places. They hire summer workers for the summer amusement park season, and they need so many workers and it's actually a great opportunity because people come and it's often their first experience for a young person in the United States. Sometimes they end up going to college, but sometimes maybe if you're not college bound, this is still a way to kind of have an exchange program. So these are great. So you can get these summer job visas. I'm going to ask the team to do a write-up on these, and we can publish that in both Finance Colombia and Empleo Bilingüe. I know a guy, a great guy. He actually is from Uzbekistan, and he came over to the U.S. and learned English because he spent a summer as a lifeguard in New York or New Jersey. And now he's a high-level government, like not vice minister, but kind of like government high-level honcho. And his experience that he had in the U.S. just informally out interacting with everyday people in the swimming pool or the beach or whatever gave him an insight that has helped him advance in his career. Then he went and got all of his formal training and everything like that. But because their government has a lot of bilateral relations and development with the U.S., his ability to connect with everyday Americans, which came from his time as a lifeguard, is now paying dividends for him as a big honcho, and it's really cool to see. I like to tease him about that, but I'm not going to embarrass him here. Colombia is going to open 5 new consulates in Phoenix, Dallas, Denver, Charlotte, and Seattle. There are already 9,000 Colombians studying in the U.S. on student visas, and there's a family unification program to do things the right way, to do things legally, in effect between the two countries, which has 6,000 current authorizations by the State Department. So let's say you're Colombian, you're working in the U.S., you're doing it the right way, you're doing it legally, you're not trying to cross the border through Mexico or through Darien and Panama or any nonsense like that. Don't do that. Because you're supporting organized crime, and it's dangerous, and it destroys. People go, how come in Colombia it's so hard for a Colombian to get a visa? Well, because so many, hate to say it, but because so many either both overstay their visas or go to the U.S. on a tourist visa or something like that, and then want to work under the table. And then when the U.S. looks at the numbers and says, okay, 3 out of every 100 Colombians are violating the system, that makes it difficult. That's why Colombia can't be a visa-free country for now. And I've had a conversation with State Department officials about that. And to be frank, that's exactly what it is. So by doing things the right way, so now you have maybe a guy or a gal working in the United States, and she wants to bring her family. There's a way to do that. And there's a bilateral agreement between the two countries to enable that, for that kind of that family reunification the right way, the legal way. Now, back to, it's kind of like we're going good news, bad news, good news, bad news. There's an ongoing scandal in the Petro administration where the government paid the equivalent of 12 million US dollars for a fleet of water tanker trucks to supply water to the citizens of La Guajira. La Guajira is if you look at a map, and if you're looking at the Caribbean coast of Colombia and you see where the border of Venezuela is with Colombia, you'll see a peninsula up there. It's east of Santa Marta. And that area is actually a desert. I've been up there. It's beautiful. Unfortunately, it's very kind of stricken with poverty. You have a lot of indigenous people. That's the homeland of the Wayuu people. But they bought all these tanker trucks because they're supposedly going to truck water in, because there's no like water mains running through the desert to take water out to people. And there's these isolated communities, lovely people. I've had the opportunity to visit as a guest of the Wayuu. But the trucks, they bought like these 42 tanker trucks, and they set idle on a Colombian military base up in the area. But the money paid to a contractor by Colombia's UNGRD, which is the National Unit of Disaster Risk Management. So that's like the I forget what we call it in the U.S., but there's like, so like in the U.S. when that hurricane came to Louisiana, and then the emergency FEMA, it's like FEMA in the United States. So so if there's an earthquake down here or a flood or a landslide, this is these are the people that are supposed to come from the government to coordinate everything, and everything from rescues to recuperation to making people whole and that kind of thing. But the UNGRD, you can think of it, for those of us who are gringos, you can think of it like FEMA. I'm sure that there are, and forgive me, I'm sure that there are analogous organizations in Asia and Europe and Africa, and Canada is going to have its own kind of thing like that. But so the money paid to a contractor was used to bribe the Senate President Ivan Name and Andres Calle in the House of Representatives to unblock oppositions to Petro's reform bills. Now remember, Petro's tried to pass health reform, pension reform, and labor reform, and so far they've all failed. But he got a couple of them unstuck, but so far none of them have really gone through. So they were basically bribing these senators and congressmen. And according to Colombia's comptroller, the controller general, each tanker truck was purchased from the dealer, which is Kenworth de la Montaña, which is in Medellin. It's down off of the main highway that runs through Medellin, for about 600 million pesos, but then sold those trucks to the government for 1.2 billion pesos. This way they could launder the money out for political purposes. So it wasn't like somebody was making this great profit. The government purposefully approved these overpayments to get their hands on the money that they can then dole out to basically bribe Congress to get their initiatives through. So the former deputy director of the UNGRD, Snyder Penilla, started the fan. As in Colombia they say prender el ventilador, which is to turn the fan on. And so in English, you know how we have a saying, when the shit hits the fan? So it's really related, because so if you have a fan and you throw, doo-doo at it, it's going to splash all over everything and make a mess, right? So in Colombia, like when they implicate you in a scandal or something like that, they say you're salpicado, which means you got splashed. So like say somebody's peeing and then they splash you. It's all grossed up, but it's funny because it really, the idioms are sort of the same as in English. And so now these two guys want to save their hides. So Snyder Penilla and the other guy, what was his name here? I mentioned it earlier. They're trying to Olmedo Lopez. So they're like willing to talk. They want to sing because they don't want to go to jail for 20 or 30 years. So Snyder accused Olmedo Lopez of using the money from this conspiracy to go and pay the bribes and covering it up with this tanker truck contract. And then the payments were made at the direction of Petro's Minister of the Interior, Luis Fernando Velasco, and the Counselor for the Regions, which is like a kind of a position where I don't know if we have something like this in the U.S., but like, let's say if the White House had somebody whose job was to go out and talk to people in Utah and stuff like that. Okay, it's kind of that kind of position. Sandra Ortiz. So she was actually the bag woman who literally had bags of cash and was delivering it to these congressmen or whatever officials that they had to bribe. Now, Olmedo Lopez and Snyder Penilla are testifying, and they want immunity with Colombia's Attorney General, who so far is not giving them full immunity, but those negotiations are still going on. Because they say that the tanker scandal is just the tip of the iceberg in a case for Colombia. This may be bigger than the Odebrecht scandal. Not if you look at the whole world, and not if you look at all of what happened in Dominican Republic and Panama and everything like that. But for Colombia, this actually, they're saying, not me, they're saying that this may actually be bigger in the quantity of bribes and the people implicated than the Odebrecht scandal. And we're just in the first 2 years of Petro's administration. Now, so far, nobody has said that they actually have not implicated Petro. So we should make that clear. They're saying that this whole thing was kind of orchestrated by Petro's people. But according to them, you be the judge, but according to them, he wasn't involved in it and didn't know about it. That's what they're saying, at least at this point. So anyway, so according to these two, Olmedo Lopez and Snyder Penilla, a political machine was set up inside the Petro administration that would launder 380 billion pesos. That's about $100 million of mermelada, which is marmalade or jelly. And that's what they call political payoffs in Colombia. So you'll see a bill getting passed, and then a Colombian will say, what kind of marmalade did they have to dish out? So like you're holding a bill up that the president wants passed, and they'll come and put in some weird thing for your little district or whatever just to get you to go along with it, right? That happens probably in all democracies. But down here they call that mermelada, which is marmalade, which if you're a rube, that just means kind of jelly. But anyway, but in this case, they're not doing it the legal, though dubious way of legislatively. They're like bringing you a big pile of cash, okay? Petro's reforms have so far failed, even though they've got this big marmalade machine. And Lopez says that the tanker truck scandal just got discovered, but according to him, there's a whole infrastructure inside the government operating with this modality to bribe legislators and fund campaigns. Now, the scary thing is that the company that sold the trucks, Impo Americano Roger, it's my brother's name, but Impo Americano Roger SAS was sold to a guy named Elmer Celis in 2019. But right before the contract for the tankers was being finalized, Celis was assassinated. So this scandal now, people have lost their lives in this. This has turned deadly. So It's something to watch. And if you wanted to Google and find out some information, probably the easiest way to do it would be to type in UNGRD, which is the Emergency Management Administration. But if you look in recent news reports, you're going to see all kind of news about that. We're just starting to cover it. We haven't really gone deep into it in Finance Colombia because it's not something that so far directly affects foreign investors, though it's gotten to the point to where we need to pay attention and start covering it. And you can expect to see more from us on that. So take a look at Finance Colombia. Now, Grupo Sura, the insurance and asset management giant. Sura is the largest insurance company in Colombia. They have everything from car insurance and health insurance. So I've described before how Colombia's EPS system works. So the employer pays money, like a set amount, into a healthcare plan for the employees. The employee gets to pick among different healthcare plans, but they all get kind of the same amount of money. And then they provide healthcare, and that's like the standard plan in Colombia. There are other things for very low income people, maybe who are not working or who are not formally employed. There are subsidies to help them access health insurance. Then if you have the money, there's private insurance, which is really good in Colombia, to be honest. But then you also have, you could show up with cash and pay the doctor. Of course, that's always available. But basically, the foundation of the Colombian healthcare system is the EPS system. Now, Petro has been trying to end the EPS system. He wants to replace it with government healthcare and have these clinics all over the country. That's kind of his idea of doing things. But anyway, Grupo Sura, which has a good EPS, I've belonged to the Sura EPS and have no complaints whatsoever. There are some other EPSs that are just awful. They don't pay their people. They don't pay their bills. It takes you a year to get an appointment. So what happens is they all get the same amount of money, but they kind of compete on quality. But Sura is just like, they've told the Colombian government that they plan to withdraw from the EPS system, and they're just going to do private insurance because they're saying that the EPS system is not viable. They don't get the money that they need to run a proper operation without losing money. Now, some of the other EPSs, they are losing money, and one of them is in kind of receivership. I think a couple of them are in receivership where you have government intervention and things like that. And it seems like they're underfunded. I mean, some of them probably have mismanagement and probably even some corruptions. But I think in a lot of cases, they're just they get a fixed amount of money. They don't get to adjust based on anything. And Sura says, screw it, we're just not going to do it anymore. So that's been kind of an earthquake in the healthcare system down here. They just announced it. They can't just like turn it off tomorrow. So, I mean, I would be surprised if Sura is not still providing EPS services by the end of the year. But they're meeting with the government to negotiate how this is going to happen because nobody's ever done this before. Nobody's ever said, you've had EPS is go broke, but you've never had somebody said, we quit. We don't want to operate an EPS anymore. And so they're going to figure out what to do. Sura is saying to its EPS, I guess you'd say policyholders, that in the short term, nothing's changing. You still have your appointments. You still make your appointments. Sura runs all these big clinics and hospitals and things like that all over the country. Those are not closing. Sura just doesn't want to get paid, doesn't want to operate the EPS anymore. Okay, they're still operating their clinics and these types of things. They're still operating their private healthcare plans. They also have a plan. I don't know. I haven't heard anything on this, but they have a complementary plan that you can get that sits on top of your EPS to make it a little bit better. But the private plans, if you can get them, are good. I can tell you that there's a hospital, San Vicente, up in Rio Negro. Rio Negro is a suburb of Medellin. And when you go in there are two separate waiting rooms. There's a waiting room if you have EPS or just kind of for Joe Sixpack. And it's still nice. It's a beautiful hospital. But if you have the private insurance, not the EPS, then there's a special waiting room for you. And there's other doctors waiting on you. And there's it's a whole different experience. Now, the hospital is great for whoever needs to go there. But what happens is the idea is to try to provide a basic competent level of healthcare for anybody. But if you can afford it, there's an outstanding, and I've got the best healthcare I've ever had in my life. Tell you that, and nothing against, I told this to my doctor friend back in the States, and nothing against them or anything like that, but they just really, the private systems do a really good job, and the doctors, I mean, I'm sure wherever you go, there's going to be a quack doctor somewhere, but the doctors that I've had have been amazing and wonderful. And so a lot of people are worried because the EPS is going away, but a lot of also people are worried because they're saying, hey, you know, the government's going after the EPS system, which it is. It wants the whole EPS system to go away. That's Petro's health reform bill, which would end all EPS systems in Colombia. But then the private people are kind of freaked out because they're like, are they going to come after us next? What's going on here? So that's something to keep an eye on. And also because Sura trades, they have ADRs that trade on in the stock exchanges in the U.S., and it's an international company. Sura has operations. They have insurance companies, but then they have asset management as well. And so that's something that does have a direct effect on international investors. Way back in 1708, the Spanish galleon San Jose was sunk by the British during the War of Spanish Succession. In the Caribbean Sea off the coast of Cartagena, the shipwreck was found in 2015 in about 600 fathoms, 600 meters, or 328 fathoms, or 2,000 feet of water. And Colombia is claiming the shipwreck as its own and using the military to fend off any kind of would-be treasure hunters that are trying to poke around down there with a yacht or something like that. So last month, Colombia announced that it was launching a research and recovery project aiming to prioritize the historical value, but no doubt this ship is full of gold, okay? But they want to preserve the historical value of the wreck. There are complications because the ship was Spanish. At the time it belonged to Spain. There was no Colombia in 1708. So Spain would need to renounce any sovereignty over the wreck. The Spanish government considers the ship a graveyard that should not be molested out of respect for the dead. Now, let's add more spice to the sancocho. Down in Bolivia, a country that has no ocean borders after Peru and Chile kind of took it from them, the Chicha Caranga and the Quillaca people have filed claims with UNESCO, that's the UN kind of United Nations Heritage and everything. I forget what it stands for, but it's the UN organization, saying that their enslaved indigenous ancestors extracted the treasure from on board from mines that in what's now Bolivia. Which I think that this is pretty much true, and have a right to share in whatever wealth is in the shipwreck. Now, I'm saying that it's true that these indigenous people were made slaves and they took the gold and silver out and they were poisoned with mercury and they were treated like slaves and brutalized and things like that. The Spanish what they did was pretty horrible. I mean, everything from making sugar in the Caribbean to the mining extraction and these types of encomiendas and these types of things that they did. They used an excuse and said that they were trying to save people's souls, but they were trying to steal people's gold. It really is a singularity in historical brutality. I mean, there are lots of other entities that are guilty of all kinds of things as well. But anyway, this is going to be an interesting case. There's a treaty, the 2001 Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage. So this treaty, which is a UN treaty, Spain is the signatory, so Spain is bound by what this treaty says, but Colombia has never ratified it, never signed it, so Colombia is not bound by the treaty. So what's going to happen? Okay, now Colombia doesn't have to follow that, but Colombia has resources, it has the proximity, it has a local navy. Not much Spain can do from where Spain sits. But now you have all these claims, and you have other countries and indigenous claims coming in, and all kinds of things like that. So it's going to be really, if I ever wanted to be a lawyer, which I don't, but if I did and I were 20 years old again, it would be really cool to be a lawyer in this kind of stuff, because you got all these claims of sovereignty and then gold, and who does the gold belong to? Well, if you use slaves to extract the gold, do their descendants have a claim on it? Colombia didn't exist, so how can Colombia claim it now? Blah, blah, blah. You could probably I'm sure you could write a whole library of textbooks on that. So speaking of Spain, the Colombian House of Representatives has outlawed bullfighting. And bullfighting is a 500-year-old tradition of bovine torture that, again, is a legacy of, came from Spain. I think there was bullfighting in other countries like Portugal and maybe Italy. If I'm wrong, forgive me. I know Portugal. I'm not sure about Italy, but certainly Italy, I mean, the Romans way back in the day had other mean things that they did with animals. But speaking of bullfighting, the Colombian government, there already was a moratorium, but the Colombian government, the Congress has finally outlawed bullfighting. The bill will go to Petro, who will definitely sign it after it comes out of reconciliation with the Senate. And it's interesting because there are people who, I think the majority of Colombians support outlawing bullfighting, especially in the cities and urban areas. You can go out and find ranchers and real traditional people. There's a guy who came out in the newspaper lamenting that, his tradition and legacy and all this kind of stuff like that. His great-grandfather built the bullfighting ring and these kinds of things like that. There's a place, Hacienda Nápoles, which was Pablo Escobar's old ranch, and the government took it from him, of course, when they killed him. And they made it into, he had all these wild animals and stuff like that, so they made it into like a nature preserve, and there's also a museum. It's about 4 hours outside of Medellin, and it's worth visiting. They did a good job. And there's a museum that talks about all the harm and the damage that Escobar did. But some of his animals and the descendants are there. Of course, everybody knows about the hippopotamus problem that they have out there in the Magdalena River. But here's something kind of funny. The bullfighting ring, so Escobar had a bullfighting ring, like a real full building, out there on his ranch, and the Colombian government took it and turned it into a museum about Africa. And it's a nice museum. I have no idea why or what the connection is, but right out there in the middle of this ranch, this former bullfighting museum this bullfighting ring is a museum about Africa. But kind of anomalous, but it actually is a nice museum. So go see it. And go out there. If you go to Hacienda Nápoles, there's a water park, so it's hot out there. So take your swimming gear. It's a family-friendly place. It's not anything tacky about Escobar, like it's cool or anything like that. When I first went, I was very skeptical. I thought it was going to be something kind of in poor taste, because I'm totally against like criminal worship or oh, you're a mafia guy and you're cool. No, you're not. You're a criminal and you hurt people. So I'm not into any of that kind of stuff like that. But I was actually surprised because what they took, something that was kind of a base for bad, for evil, and made it into something really nice. So I highly recommend if you visit Medellin. You can get to it from Bogota too, or from Bucaramanga. But it's about 4 hours northeast of Medellin. It's called Hacienda with an H, Nápoles, Napoles, and definitely worth the visit. You can see the old airstrip that Escobar had and all this stuff like that out there. But anyway, so Reuters is reporting that it got access to a secret report showing that all of the major criminal mafias in Colombia, speaking of mafias, expanded last year, which makes a mockery of President Petro's total peace initiative. So he ran saying, we're going to have paz total. So we're going to, in my administration, we're going to end all the, like he kind of made it sound like these mafia guys, if somebody just gave them a chance and milk and cookies, they would turn in their machine guns and coca labs. But what's happened is that all the major groups, so you've got 4 kind of groups they're all just mafias now. They're not really, they claim to be political, but they're not. They're just mafias. They use that as kind of an excuse. So you have 3 on the left and 1 on the right. You have the ELN, which of course has been around forever. And they came out of that liberation theology stuff from back in the 50s and 60s. Then you have the Clan del Golfo, which is made out of former paramilitary people. The Gulf, they're talking about the Gulf of Uribe, which is in the northern part of Antioquia by the Caribbean Sea. This would be between Cartagena and the Panamanian border. That's the Gulf of Uribe is up there. And so they're a big mafia group. They're not really, they never even try to pretend like they're political. They're just a big mafia. Then you have the two former FARC dissident groups that did not sign on or that rejected the 2016 peace agreement, where most of the FARC agreed to disarm. And you've got Estado Mayor Central, the central major state, is what they call themselves, and the Segunda Marquetalia, which is, so you have these two groups that are descendants of the FARC. So Petro ran his campaign promising total peace, but these groups, 3 of the 4, are avowed communist guerrillas, and the Clan del Golfo just keep getting bigger. So I don't know when is the total peace going to start. Reuters also reported that in the Amazon, which again, the dear president ran promising to protect. And you guys remember, okay, don't think that I'm like this guy who's got it in for Petro. If you have a memory, I was very critical of Ivan Duque and his administration as well. You can go back and read articles and opinions and things like that I've written. So I just call it as I see it, okay? I want total peace. But if you run and you say we're going to get total peace, you got to deliver. And if the criminal groups are getting bigger, I'm not some right-wing guy by saying, hey, you're failing. Okay, so just keep that in mind. If you think I'm being partisan or something like that, I'm not. But so in the Amazon, the government, there's a report out there, and again, this came from the same Reuters source, that there's 12 new illegal roads built where they bring in the heavy material or the heavy machinery and the graders and all that stuff like that down in Chiribiquete. Chiribiquete is a nature preserve. They call it a national park, but it's not a park where you can like go in there and see the bears or anything like that. You're not even allowed to go in it. Nobody's allowed to go in it. I mean, some scientists probably can go in there from the government or something like that, but you can't go in. It's off limits. But there are at least 12 illegal roads built, according to Reuters, and some other sources, some organizations that track this. I'll put a link in there. And these mafias, in this particular case in Chiribiquete, it looks like the Estado Mayor is building these roads to conduct illegal activities. So in nature preserves, so they can put in there, they can do gold mining. I've heard of even coltan mining, like tungsten or one of these kind of ores that they need for electronics. Obviously, cocaine labs and processing labs and things like that way out in the middle of the jungle. Gold mining, when you do it the way that these illegal groups do, it's devastating for the environment because you use mercury and poison everything. If you're more sophisticated, you might use cyanide, which again is a deadly poison. And the government appears to be unwilling or unable or both to combat and stop this activity. So that's enough for this week. Remember to practice critical thinking, stay mentally and physically active, and above all, be kind to yourself and others. Talk to you soon.